Hi, I'm Demetria, and you're listening to Soul Podcasting, a podcast where I share weekly insights, advice, and support for new and veteran podcasters. I'm your podcast coach. I'm here to inspire and motivate you to launch and grow your podcast and make an impact on your community. And you are listening to episode number 16. This show is sponsored by Faith Media and Impact Podcast Coach, a service that supports women podcasters to boldly share their voices and their powerful messages through the medium of podcasting. You can find out more about our podcast coaching services and courses by visiting impactpodcastcoach.com. So on my last episode, we talked about how to turn your audio content into video. I hope you enjoyed that one. And if you would love to go back and check it out, that's episode 15. And then prior to that, we talked about some of the podcasting mistakes that I made over the past 17 years in podcasting. We're getting close to year 18 at this point. The more I think about how many years I've been doing this, it just really makes me so much more excited to share my tips and advice with you. So I started this podcast because I wanted to make sure that I contribute to the podcasting community in some way, since I've been doing it for so long and because it's such a passion for me. And I want to give you guys the real deal because I know that there are a lot of podcast advisors out there and lots of coaches and consultants now that are rising up to share their information as well. But I want to make sure that what you hear from me is valid, it's realistic, it's practical, and it's something that makes sense for you and gives you an objective view of what podcasting really is, minus all the fluff. And I want to make sure that you understand the realities of podcasting. So when you're thinking about starting one or whether you're growing a current podcast, there are some realistic expectations you can have and some that maybe not so realistic for you, depending on what your goals are for what you're doing. That's why I have soul podcasting. Also, I believe that soul podcasting is kind of this term that I came up with to describe what it means to podcast as a result of sharing your heart, your intentions, your motives, and your passions, things that you want to expose and share with the world and encourage your listeners. And it's coming from your soul, right? So it's very natural for you and it's something that you love to talk about. And so we talk about soul podcasting in that way, but there's so many aspects of podcasting, including your branding and your marketing and, how to generate an income with your podcast, or if income earning is not what you're out to do and you just want to use it as a form of entertainment or ministry, for example, then how you can best bring yourself to the table, bring your best self to the table in order to best serve your audience. That said, on this particular episode, we're going to talk about booking wonderful, awesome, fabulous guests for your show. Should you ever get to a point where you're just kind of tired of running solo and you want to interview people, then this show is for you. So let's talk about some of the benefits. And then on another episode, we'll talk about how to go about booking guests. So over the years, I've interviewed well over 100 guests on a total of 8 different podcasts. And it's really exciting every time I get on the microphone and on camera with someone that I'm interviewing. They really bring a lot to the table for my show. And there's a lot of benefits. So let me share with you 4 benefits of having a guest. Number 1, they provide incredible value to your listeners. That's probably your main reason that you're going to ask someone to come on your show. You want people that are, first of all, very passionate about what they're doing, right? You want someone who knows exactly what their purposes and their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish. And you're able to see what they're doing just by visiting their website and their socials and following them a little bit on social media and online. You can see what that person is about before you ask them to be a part of your network. So it's important that you book people that you believe in. And so check them out and make sure that that's who you want. But obviously, when people come to you to be interviewed or you you go find them and scout them out, however you go about doing that, you want them on your show because they're going to provide that valuable content to your listeners. The reciprocity of the situation is that they're receiving extra eyeballs on what they're doing and casting their net to a wider audience by being on your show. But at the same time, your audience is receiving hopefully great value from what your guest is bringing to the table. So it's just an incredible way to bring a different perspective to a topic that your listeners might not hear from you, because the person you're bringing on hopefully is the subject expert in what they're doing, and they understand their content and their niche so very well that they're able to bring that extra slant and additional viewpoint to your listeners in a way that you couldn't do by yourself. So it's really important when you bring someone on that you, number one, you believe in what they're doing, and number two, that you know for a fact that this is the person that can bring incredible value to your listeners. Number two, another reason that you would benefit from having a guest on your show is that they completely take a load off for you. Even though there is work involved in creating the flow and the format of the show when you have a guest, including coming up with their sample questions, if that's something you do in your processes, or getting them prepped for what you'd like for them to talk about on your interview, for the most part, the bulk of the content is coming from them. So you'll be asking questions and they'll be responding with the content. So it takes some of the pressure off of you to have to come up with content for that episode. Again, aside from the fact that you'll need to prep some questions or have some idea of what you want to ask them and how you want the interview to flow. Aside from that, the pressure is off. Number three, you can reach a wider audience. So even though they're coming on your platform to reach a wider audience for their own business or audience, you as the podcast host are also able to reach a wider audience as you tap into leveraging your guests' audience as well. So as they share your episode with their audience, whether that's socials and preferably by email, then you are able to get the word out about your podcast. And that's one way to do it without you having to do anything else except have them on and ask them to reciprocate by sharing that episode with their audience, their listeners, their viewers, their readers. And specifically, if they have an email list, it's a great idea to ask them to shoot out an email and invite people to listen to the episode. So I see podcasting when you're interviewing people as kind of a win-win situation, because you benefit, they benefit, everybody's benefiting, and it doesn't always have to be equal in terms of 50-50. You don't always have to know how wide their audience is and how wide their connection points are. You don't want to judge a book by the cover. You don't go look at their Instagram and think, oh, they have 500 followers, probably won't get much reach, versus if they have 80,000 followers, right? You don't want to only look at their social media profiles and so forth, but you want to also think about all of the different ways that your interviewee, your guest, could be exposing the interview and sharing the interview with their own circle of influence. That could be people that maybe go to a social event with them, or maybe at church, or a friend group that they have, and they just spread the word around. You never know. So you never want to judge too quickly and think, oh, well, their socials, their following isn't so huge. Or, what about their list? Maybe they don't have enough people on their list, so I'm not going to interview that person because they don't have enough of a subscriber base for me to feel like it's going to be fairly reciprocated. So never judge that. What you want to be open to is the fact that that person who has a lot of value to bring to your listenership also has a network, and maybe a network that you're not aware of. So I always keep that in mind when I have people on. I don't look for just a particular type, but I do absolutely look for people that have a well-crafted brand and who are very niche and very focused on what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And as a result, you are also going to reach a wider audience as well, because as they share their interview, once again, that's a wider audience for you to reach additionally. So never judge too quickly. And number 4, you can learn from your subject experts. So I like to look at my guests as subject matter experts, SMEs. These are people that I would ask them for their advice, even if they weren't on my podcast. Right? So these are people that I would say, can I ask you a question about whatever it is? So they're life coaches, they're business coaches, they're mentors, they're people that have value to bring to my show because they have value to bring in general. So those are the people that I ask, and I know that if I could learn from them, so could my listeners. So those are 4 benefits for interviewing your guests. Number 1, they provide value to your listeners. Number 2, they take a load off of you from having to create your own content. Number 3, you can reach a wider audience through your guests' circle of influence. And number 4, you can personally learn from your subject experts. So I hope that this has been helpful to you and that you will take this information and be encouraged to start interviewing guests. And hopefully, as I mentioned on every show, one of these days, you guys are going to hear guests on this show as well. As some of you know who have been listening to the show for a while, I host Her Business Elevated podcast. And on that show, which is specifically for women of faith in business, I like to interview someone about once or twice a month. And so you can hear some of my interviews there. But I do plan to have people here as well. But I wanted to share with you why interviewing has been so beneficial to me over the years. I think having a solo podcast is absolutely fine if you don't wish to interview anyone. And as I mentioned in my last episode, I wanted my first at least 20 episodes here to just be me and you. And with time, I would bring on, but there is kind of a method to my madness here. And the reason I wanted to do that is to kind of solidify what this show is about before I start bringing people on. And also just to show that it's perfectly fine if you don't want to interview anyone for your podcast. So that's just, an option, right? There are so many different ways to run a show and you don't have to interview people. It is not necessary to have a professional podcast to have a show that is valuable and something that people consider binge-worthy and want to listen to regularly. You don't have to interview people to do that in order to accomplish that. However, if you wish to interview people, these are the tips that I hope will help encourage you that it's a great way to go. I mean, there's benefits to interviewing people, and it can really help to expand your network and expand theirs and take some of the pressure off of you from creating solid content, especially if you're going through a period of time where you just need a break from coming up with your own content and you just want someone else to come on and take the reins and lead and discuss. That's a great way to take a little reprieve and bring a different slant to your show and add value in a different way. So I hope that you'll find these tips helpful to you. Reach out to me on impactpodcastcoach.com. I do have a SpeakPipe there. It was there for a while. I think I took it down for a minute and it should be back. So if you'd like to leave a voicemail, that's one way to do that. Again, impactpodcastcoach.com. Look for the SpeakPipe on the side of the screen. Additionally, if you find this podcast to be helpful to you, please do not hesitate to head on over to Apple Podcasts and scroll on your phone. It seems that the mobile devices are the easiest way to do this. Scroll all the way to the bottom once you find my podcast and leave a 5-star review. And where it says write a review, I'd love for you to go ahead, click that link and go ahead and write a brief review. Leave your name so that I can see that you've left a review, and I will possibly read it out on this show and mention you. And if you host a podcast, I would love to support you by sharing your podcast on this show as well. But I do have to see your name and your podcast title tagged on your review. So just make sure when you leave your review, just kind of sign off with your name and your podcast title so that I can shout you out here on the show. Okay. Thank you so much for listening and happy podcasting.